Greetings, loved ones. There are many common family, parent, and child factors that place children at risk for neglect, as well as factors that can protect children from neglect. While the presence of a risk factor does not mean a child will be neglected, multiple risk factors are a cause for concern. Research indicates that many factors place children at greater risk of being harmed or endangered by neglect. So these are really important messages that we're sharing with you. Please help us get them out. Subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and the notification bell and share these messages with others. So let's talk about risk factors for child neglect. While the presence of a risk factor does not mean that a child will be neglected, multiple risk factors are a cause for concern. Research indicates that the following factors place children at greater risk of being harmed or endangered by neglect. Environmental risk factors: poverty, lack of social support, neighborhood distress. Then we have family risk factors: single-parent households, family stress or negative interactions, and domestic violence. Parent risk factors include unemployment or low socioeconomic status, young maternal age, health, mental illness, or substance abuse problems, and parenting stress. Child risk factors can be age and developmental delays. Ultimately, the only certain risk is that the more often a child experiences neglect, the more likely he or she will be harmed by it, which is why prevention and early identification of neglect are critical. So let's talk about protective factors. Although several factors place children at greater risk of neglect, research shows that families with one or more of the following protective factors are less likely to experience abuse or neglect. So if there's a nurturing and attachment among the family, if there's knowledge of parenting and child development, if there's parental resilience present, a lot of social connections, if there are concrete supports for parents, and social and emotional competence of children. Let's talk about chronic neglect. Although some individual incidents of neglect may not appear harmful, multiple incidents of neglect occurring over time, known as chronic neglect, can have a greater negative impact on the child. Chronic neglect is an ongoing and serious pattern of deprivation of a child's basic needs that results in accumulation of harm. Chronic neglect can be hard to identify and treat. Affected families face complex problems that require specialized, often long-term interventions and coordinated community support. I want to repeat that: coordinated community support. There needs to be programs in place to help them. Special considerations occur, things that we need to look at. Neglect rarely occurs in isolation. Commonly related issues include poverty, substance abuse, and domestic violence. These are special considerations for addressing these issues with at-risk or neglected children and their families. Let's talk about poverty. Poverty is frequently linked to child neglect, but it is important to note that most poor families do not neglect their children. Poverty likely increases the risk of neglect by interacting with and worsening related risks like parental stress, inadequate housing and homelessness, lack of basic needs, inadequate supervision, substance abuse, and domestic violence. So we must differentiate between neglectful situations and poverty. In many states, definitions of neglect include considerations for a family's financial means. For example, if a family living in poverty was not providing adequate food for their children, it would be considered neglect only if the parents were aware of but chose not to use food assistance programs. Taking poverty into consideration can prevent unnecessary removals and place the focus on providing concrete services for families to protect and provide for their children. Then there's substance abuse. Parental substance abuse is more closely related to child neglect than other forms of abuse. Parents who lose control under the influence of substances may have impaired reasoning abilities, leave the child in an unsafe situation, or neglect the child's basic needs. These parents may also have difficulty conforming to expected parenting roles and providing the children with emotional support. While treating the parent's substance abuse is a priority, treatment must be combined with services to address the child's needs and improve overall family function. Let's talk about substance-exposed newborns. This is one that is dear to my heart in trying to prevent. When a woman abuses drugs or alcohol during her pregnancy, the unborn child is at greater risk for developmental delays. In some situations, some abusive exposed newborns are left at the hospital by their mothers. These infants, sometimes referred to as border babies, usually require CPS intervention to place them in out-of-home care. It also puts the child at risk of being born addicted to the drugs. Child welfare caseworkers and healthcare providers must work together to identify, assess, and develop a plan to care for affected infants and their families. So let's talk about the risk factor of domestic violence. Some states include exposure to domestic violence in their legal definitions of child abuse or neglect due to its potential effects on children. An unintended consequence of these policies is that parents who are domestic violence victims sometimes are charged with a type of neglect termed failure to protect, despite circumstances that may have impacted the victim's ability to prevent the child's exposure to violence. Child welfare caseworkers, in collaboration with domestic violence professionals, should consider the victim's access to resources or services outside the home, as well as the victim's reasonable efforts to ensure the child had basic necessities and lived in the least detrimental environment possible. A strong relationship with the victim parent is a protective factor that can increase the child's resilience, and research indicates in one of the most effective ways to protect the child is to keep the victim safe. To address domestic violence cases involving children, workers and others should keep the victim, parent, and child together whenever possible, enhance the safety, stability, and well-being of all the victims, and hold the perpetrators of violence accountable through mechanisms such as batterer intervention programs. Let's talk about educational neglect. Many states struggle to respond efficiently to reports of educational neglect due to overlapping responsibilities and lack of coordination between the departments of social services and education. A national review found that nearly half of states neither define educational neglect in law nor hold one agency responsible for reporting it. There is inconsistency among the remaining states regarding which agency is responsible for enforcing neglect provisions, including the court, the school or school district, and the Department of Education. The study recommends that the state's Department of Social Services be primarily responsible for addressing educational neglect because it is better equipped to address the co-occurring problems families often face. It also cites promising programs in Missouri and Idaho that offer coordinated and flexible services through the Department of Social Services to respond quickly to families in crisis and at risk of educational neglect. According to the CDC, over half of all children in the world, that's 1 billion children ages 2 to 17, experience violence every year. The question is not if you will encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be the person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions of justice. Those who suffer violence need to know that those who love them and those who don't even know them will reach out and give them the help they need before it's too late. These are really important messages. Please help us get them out. Subscribe to our channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and the notification bell, and please share these messages with others. If you're a victim of violence, listen to me. You are valued. You are loved. You are intelligent, and yes, you are worthy. There is a way out. You are not trapped. It's not your fault. Abuse is not love, and you are not alone. Listen to all those things I just said. If you're a victim of violence, reach out to someone today. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, just dial 911. If you know of a child suffering from violence, tell the authorities. Don't investigate it, just tell the authorities. In our next episode, we're going to talk about investigation and assessment of neglect. Until then, God bless you.